On a quiet afternoon in October 1988, a motorist who had run out of gas made a discovery that would haunt a small Pennsylvania community for decades. Walking along the Ontellalone Trail near Reading, searching for help, he stumbled upon something far more disturbing than he could have imagined. The body of a young woman lay in the woods, partially concealed by fallen leaves and brush. She had been strangled with baling twine, her face severely bruised from what investigators would later determine was a violent struggle. The victim was 26-year-old Anna Kane, a mother of three who had last been seen alive just 14 hours earlier in the heart of Reading's red light district. What followed was a murder investigation that seemed destined to remain forever cold, until a single mistake by the killer himself would eventually seal his fate 34 years later. Anna Kane was described by those who knew her as a firecracker, someone outgoing and unafraid of anything. She had recently moved to the Birdsboro area and was raising 3 children, a daughter and 2 boys. While she had struggled with substance abuse and worked as a prostitute, her daughter Tamika Reyes would later speak out about how the media portrayed her mother, insisting she was a loving, caring, and honest person who deserved better than the fate that befell her. On the night of October 23, 1988, Anna was last seen around 1 in the morning near Franklin and South 6th Streets in Reading. Investigators believe she had gone there looking for a customer. By 3:15 that afternoon, she was found dead, having been killed at another location and dumped in the woods. When Pennsylvania State Police arrived at the scene, they launched what would become one of the longest-running investigations in Berks County history. The crime scene told them several crucial details. The ground beneath Anna's body was wet from recent rain, but her clothing was completely dry. This confirmed she had been killed elsewhere and transported to the wooded area to be disposed of. The rain had stopped around midnight, giving investigators a narrow window to work with. More importantly, they found something that would prove invaluable decades later, even though they didn't know it at the time. DNA evidence was carefully collected from Anna's clothing and preserved. It revealed that an unknown male had been present, but the profile matched nothing in any database. Without a suspect and no witnesses coming forward, the case went cold. Then came the breakthrough that should have changed everything. In February 1990, more than 15 months after Anna's murder, the Reading Eagle newspaper received an anonymous letter. It was signed simply as a concerned citizen, but this was no ordinary tip. The letter contained intimate details about the crime, information that had never been released to the public. The writer knew exactly how Anna's clothing had been displayed at the crime scene. The letter described where her body had been dumped with a level of detail that could only come from one source. Investigators immediately realized what they were looking at. This letter had been written by Anna Kane's killer. State Police Trooper Daniel Womer would later explain that the specifics in the letter led them to believe whoever wrote it had committed the homicide. The envelope containing the letter was tested for DNA, and investigators held their breath as results came back. It was a match. The DNA on the envelope, left behind when the killer licked the seal, was identical to the unknown male DNA found on Anna's clothing. For the first time, they had confirmation. The person who wrote this taunting letter was the same person who had strangled Anna Kane and left her in the woods. There was just one devastating problem. Even with this crucial evidence, they still had no idea who the killer was. The DNA profile was entered into the FBI's Combined DNA Index system when it launched in 1998, but year after year, it matched nothing. The killer had never been arrested for any crime serious enough to require a DNA sample. He remained a ghost, hidden in plain sight somewhere in Pennsylvania. For Anna's family, the waiting was unbearable. Her daughter Tamika was just 9 years old when her mother was murdered. As the years turned into decades, she watched her younger brothers grow up with no memories of their mother at all. The case consumed her thoughts, but as time passed, hope began to fade. Tamika started to believe she would never know who had taken her mother away. The investigators who had originally worked the case retired. New detectives took over, reviewing the files again and again, searching for anything they might have missed. But without new technology or new leads, there was nothing they could do except wait and hope that someday, somehow, the killer would make another mistake. That day finally came, but it required a revolution in forensic science. In the early 2000s, A new technique called genetic genealogy began transforming how cold cases could be solved. Instead of relying on direct DNA matches in criminal databases, investigators could now use DNA testing services that the general public used to trace their ancestry. By uploading the unknown killer's DNA profile to these genealogy databases, they could find distant relatives and build family trees, slowly narrowing down the list of possible suspects. It was a painstaking process, but it worked. In 2002, Pennsylvania State Police decided to take another look at Anna Cain's case using this cutting-edge technology. They sent the DNA evidence to Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, a company that specialized in using genetic genealogy to solve cold cases. The work was funded by a grant from the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, an organization dedicated to bringing justice to victims of violent crime. Researchers at Parabon began the meticulous process of building a family tree from the killer's DNA. They searched for genetic matches, found distant cousins, and slowly pieced together generations of family connections. After months of work, the tree began to point toward a specific family in the Hamburg area of Pennsylvania. Eventually, they narrowed it down to two brothers. One of them had a history of violent behavior. His name was Scott Grimm. Investigators quickly learned that Scott Grimm had been a Hamburg area native living in southeastern Pennsylvania his entire life. He was 26 years old in 1988, the same age as Anna Cain when she was murdered. But when detectives tried to track him down for questioning, they discovered something that would change the entire trajectory of the case. Scott Grimm had died in 2018 of natural causes at the age of 58. He had lived for 30 years after murdering Anna Cain, going about his life never facing consequences for what he had done. The man they had spent decades searching for was already gone. But investigators weren't ready to give up. They needed to be absolutely certain they had identified the right person before bringing their findings to Anna's family. Even though Scott Grimm was dead, his DNA could still be obtained. Police declined to reveal exactly how they acquired a direct sample of his genetic material, but they were successful in getting it. They also discovered something else during their investigation into Grimm's background. In 2002, he had been arrested by Exeter Township Police for harassing a former business partner. That case involved Grimm sending threatening letters, a pattern of behavior that was eerily familiar. The police lab conducted a comprehensive comparison. They tested Grimm's DNA against 3 separate pieces of evidence: the 1990 letter to the Reading Eagle, the letters from the 2002 harassment case, and the original DNA found on Anna Cain's clothing in 1988. All 3 were a perfect match. There was no doubt Scott Grimm was Anna Cain's killer. On August 18, 2022, Pennsylvania State Police held a news conference at their Troop L headquarters in Reading. They announced that after 34 years, they had finally solved the murder of Anna Cain. Standing before the assembled media, investigators explained how genetic genealogy had led them to Scott Grimm and how his own DNA had confirmed his guilt. Berks County District Attorney John Adams addressed the difficult reality of the situation. He acknowledged that because Grimm was deceased, he would never face justice in a courtroom, he would never be arrested, tried, or convicted. But Adams emphasized that they had solved the case and hopefully provided some measure of closure to Anna's family. For Tamika Reyes, now 42 years old, the news brought a flood of conflicting emotions. She told reporters that she had never thought she would see this day, though she had always held on to a thin thread of hope. When she learned that Scott Grimm had been identified, she felt happy to finally put a face to the monster who had taken her mother away. But she also felt anger and sadness knowing that he would never face consequences for his crime. Grimm had lived a full life after murdering Anna, eventually dying peacefully of natural causes while Anna's children grew up without their mother. The injustice of it was almost too much to bear. Yet, there was also relief in finally knowing the truth, in being able to tell her younger brothers who had killed their mother. Investigators continued to dig into Scott Grimm's life after the announcement, trying to understand if there had been any connection between him and Anna Cain. Both had lived in the same area of Pennsylvania, but no evidence of a prior relationship was ever found. Trooper Womer mentioned that given Anna's work as a prostitute, it was possible Grimm could have been a customer, but this remains speculation. What they did know was that Grimm had a history of sending letters when he wanted to intimidate or control situations, as evidenced by the harassment case. The letter to the Reading Eagle fit this pattern perfectly. It was an attempt to insert himself into the investigation, to taunt authorities while feeling superior because he believed they would never catch him. The Anna Kane case highlights both the incredible advances in forensic science and the frustrating limitations of the justice system. Genetic genealogy has revolutionized cold case investigations, giving hope to families who thought they would never get answers. Since the technique was first successfully used to identify the Golden State Killer in 2018, it has helped solve hundreds of cases across the United States. Detectives can now reach back decades, pulling DNA from carefully preserved evidence and using it to build family trees that lead directly to killers who thought they had gotten away with murder. But while the science can identify perpetrators with remarkable accuracy, it cannot bring them back from the dead to face trial. The question of whether justice has truly been served when a suspect dies before prosecution remains contentious. Some argue that simply identifying the killer and clearing their name from suspicion is enough. It allows families to have answers, to know who took their loved one away, even if that person can never be punished. Others believe that without a trial, without the opportunity to hear evidence presented in court and to see a killer sentenced for their crimes, true justice remains elusive. For the families of victims, the feelings are often complicated and contradictory. There is relief in knowing the truth, but also deep frustration that the person responsible will never sit in a courtroom and hear a judge pronounce them guilty. In Anna Kane's case, the most chilling aspect is how close Scott Grimm came to getting away with his crime entirely. If he had not sent that letter to the newspaper, if he had not licked that envelope, investigators would have had no way to connect him to the murder. His DNA was never in any criminal database because he was never convicted of a serious crime. Without the genetic genealogy breakthrough, without the preserved evidence from 1988, and without Grimm's own arrogance in writing that taunting letter, this case would still be unsolved today. The irony is inescapable. The very act meant to demonstrate his superiority over the police became the evidence that ultimately exposed him. Captain Robert Bailey of the Pennsylvania State Police emphasized an important message when the case was closed. Every victim, regardless of their background, deserves closure and deserves to have their case investigated thoroughly. For too long, crimes against sex workers and others living on society's margins have been deprioritized or dismissed entirely. Anna Kane's story is a reminder that behind every cold case file is a real person who was loved, who had dreams, who left behind grieving family members desperate for answers. The fact that she worked as a prostitute did not make her any less deserving of justice. The fact that she struggled with addiction did not diminish the tragedy of her murder or the pain felt by her children growing up without her. Today, the case of Anna Kane stands as both a success story and a cautionary tale. It shows what is possible when investigators refuse to give up, when they preserve evidence carefully, and when they embrace new technologies that can breathe life into the coldest of cases. But it also serves as a stark reminder that sometimes answers come too late for traditional justice. Scott Grimm lived freely for 3 decades after strangling Anna Kane and dumping her body in the woods. He died at 58, never having faced a single day of punishment for what he did. Meanwhile, Tamika Reyes and her brothers spent those same decades wondering, grieving, and searching for a truth that would only arrive after the man who destroyed their family was already gone.